When the state is involved in coercing people, by and large, you're dealing here with a certain type of criminal personality. And in the Clinton administration, you're dealing with something that is not so much a government as an ongoing criminal enterprise. You've got graft, bribery, extortion, cover-up. These are the standard operating procedures for the Clinton administration. Just to examine each of these in turn. Graft. Graft, of course, is the use of influence corruptly to benefit people who materially enrich you. The sale of seats on Asian trading missions to the Commerce Department is a perfect example of graft. What we call graft, the Chinese call guangxi. That's one of those expressions that sort of infiltrated our language as a result of the Chinagate scandal. For the Red Chinese elite, graft, once again, is standard operating procedure. They're of like mind with the people who are running the Clinton administration. Bribery. Bribery is what Chinagate is all about. The receipt of bribes by the President of the United States in the form of these illegal campaign contributions so as to suborn him to use his powers of office in ways that injure our national security and enrich the people who gave him bribes. Extortion. The recently completed impeachment melodrama was just chock full of extortion. You had the spectacle here of a pornographer acting as an agent of extortion on behalf of the president and providing him with a character reference, which is something unprecedented in our history, quite frankly. You've probably heard the expression opposition research. This consists, of course, of an enterprise in which agents of the president avail themselves of personal information, sometimes compromising personal information from files, FBI files and the like, and then the use of this material to create leverage in the form of blackmail threats against those who would present a potential threat to the president and to his continued tenure in office. Larry Klayman of Judicial Watch is a legal activist who has unearthed much of the material dealing with Chinagate. Referring to this enterprise of presidential extortion, Larry Klayman said the following: "This has very serious implications because this whole information gathering scheme, in my view, is why Republican senators have been rendered little more than eunuchs on Capitol Hill. People are understandably afraid of this kind of power. You cross the White House and you end up with an IRS audit or are the target of a dirty smear campaign. It does help explain the reluctance of people in this town to hold the president accountable." Once again, does this sound like a government or does this sound like a mafia? I contend that it sounds more like the latter than the former. The art of cover-up. Once again, let's revert to the language of organized crime. In the mafia, there is something called omerta, or the oath of silence. In the Albanian mafia, it's called besa. In the communist version of the mafia, which is to say the ruling elites of communism, is called something else, but it's an oath of silence. If you're put into a position, we'll talk about that a little bit this evening with specific reference to some of the figures in Chinagate. If you're put in a position where by answering questions truthfully, you will injure the ongoing criminal enterprise, you have a duty under omerta or its equivalents to be silent even at the expense of going to prison. And there are several characters of that sort. Character is the wrong word. There are several individuals of that sort that we will discuss this evening. That, of course, is something which has been entirely typical of the Clinton administration. Louis Freeh, who is the director of the FBI, was asked in the summer of 1997, during the course of the Thompson Committee investigation in the Senate, about the scores of people who had refused to cooperate with congressional investigators regarding Chinagate, people who'd fled the country, people who had taken the Fifth Amendment, people who had simply gone into hiding, people who had gone to jail rather than cooperating. Louis Freeh, the FBI director, was asked, have you ever seen such a spectacle in your life of people who were in a position to help an investigation simply refusing to cooperate? He said, yes, I have, but you have to remember I used to work with the Organized Crime Bureau in New York City. The FBI director is comparing the Clinton administration to the mafia. This isn't a right-wing extremist who is saying this. This is Louis Freeh. Then, of course, you have the spectacle of the Attorney General of the United States presiding over what is called, with some ironic wit, the Justice Department, who is acting as a relentless obstructionist at every conceivable juncture, including at some risk to herself in terms of jail time and fines. She has been cited for contempt of Congress because she refuses to turn over a key memo developed within the FBI by Charles Labella, who was heading up the investigation of Chinagate within the so-called Justice Department. Mr. Labella said, we need an independent prosecutor. in order to investigate Chinagate, specifically the role of Al Gore as the bag man for a lot of these illegal campaign donations. Janet Reno does not want to appoint an independent counsel, and so the House Government Reform Committee, headed by Dan Burton, subpoenaed that memo. Janet Reno simply refused to turn over the memo. She was hit with a contempt of court citation. She could end up going to jail for at least a year and paying a fine of $1,000 if she is convicted of contempt of Congress. This is something that goes beyond simple intransigence on the part of Janet Reno. We're talking about, once again, the dynamics that you see in an organized crime syndicate. Another thing that we saw at work in the course of the Monica Lewinsky scandal, which really, I think, was a delaying tactic employed by the Clinton administration, simply to wage a war of attrition against the public in terms of wearing down our attention span by immersing us in the sordid and completely irrelevant details of Mr. Clinton's personal misbehavior. But one thing we did see in the course of the Lewinsky scandal was Mr. Clinton's singular ability to lie. Some of you are aware of the phrase polymorphous perversity. It's a phrase that you can find in certain psychological textbooks. Bill Clinton is the master of polymorphous prevarication. His lies are cleverly wrought and intricately detailed, and they are wonderfully adaptable. They can adapt themselves to nearly any circumstance or set of facts. It is a gift. It's a diabolical gift. It's one that I do not covet, but it is a gift. And it plays a very important role in the Chinagate scandal. Think of what we were told over and over again during the course of the Monica Lewinsky scandal. Everybody lies about sex. So we shouldn't hold Mr. Clinton accountable for lying about sex, because sex is a supposedly inconsequential thing. I do not happen to agree with that assessment, but that's what we were told. The embedded assumption here is that if he would lie about something this inconsequential, certainly he would not lie about something much more consequential, like treason. Does that strike any of you as logical? It does not strike me at all as logical. I think his incentive to lie is far greater when you're dealing with matters of much greater consequence. His defense, when backed into a corner and asked about his conduct with Monica Lewinsky, was to say, I didn't think that I was lying because I didn't think it was sex. And the public bought this. Many of us didn't. As a matter of fact, I not only didn't buy this, I was offended that somebody was selling it, okay? But a lot of the public bought this. You couldn't say the same thing, however, and apply it to treason. I didn't lie about it because I didn't think it was treason. That doesn't really play as well now, does it? I don't think the public would have bought this as readily. The problem is that's exactly what Bill Clinton is trying to sell. During the Lewinsky imbroglio, Congressman Thomas Barrett said the following, quote, "It was not an offense against the body politic, what Mr. Clinton did with Monica Lewinsky. The problem here is the second part of what he said. It did not threaten our republic. It was not an offense against the body politic. It did not threaten our republic. Chinagate does. And that is why Lewinsky was the topic of conversation rather than Chinagate. After it was disclosed in late 1996 that the Clinton-Gore re-election campaign had received millions of dollars in illegal foreign sources for its re-election effort, thereby compromising our national security, and that in exchange for these donations, Mr. Clinton most probably made critical policy decisions that aided and abetted the source of these illegal campaign contributions, Mr. Clinton tried out the following rationalization. Quote, "I don't believe you can find any evidence of the fact that I had changed government policy solely because of a contribution." The problem here is that that is not the legal standard for bribery. You can have manifold motivations for taking a bribe and corruptly exercising your power in a way that aids the person who gave you the bribe. The problem here is that Mr. Clinton says that the key questions are all things that have to do with his subjective motivations. The same way sex isn't sex if he doesn't believe it's sex. Bribery isn't bribery if he believes that there is some other motivation apart from servicing the source of the bribes. You see, and it doesn't work that way. We shouldn't allow people to fall into the trap of believing that Mr. Clinton can define the terms upon which this discussion will take place. And too much that has happened in Congress, both in the Lewinsky matter and in Chinagate, has followed that unfortunate pattern. One last thing I'd like to say by way of establishing the groundwork here in defining what Mr. Clinton has done and the things that he has been allowed to get away with has to do with Mr. Clinton's belief that in waging a war against impeachment that included smears, extortion, that included the subornation of subordinates, suborning perjury, that involved outright perjury, that involved at least 2 gratuitous and inexcusable uses of our military to launch distractions abroad. A couple of things I'd like to say about this. But in doing all of this, Mr. Clinton believes that he was defending the Constitution. Let's examine that a little bit. On March 31st of 1999, Mr. Clinton was interviewed by Dan Rather. He said the following, when asked if he had ever thought of resigning, or when asked if he thought that his impeachment, his status as the only elected president ever to be impeached, would stain his legacy. This is how Mr. Clinton responded, quote, "I am honored that something this indefensible was pursued and that I had the opportunity to defend the Constitution." February 19th, he had a joint press conference with Jacques Chirac of France. This is what he had to say when asked the same question. By being vindicated of charges, that is to say, by not being removed from office after being impeached, quote, "I think the Constitution has been, in effect, re-ratified." Let's examine that for a second. The Constitution to which Mr. Clinton refers is apparently now a re-ratified document containing a rather interesting amendment that says, "A president shall be regarded as immune to prosecution or removal from office for the duration of his high approval ratings." That is a dangerous proposition. Approval ratings, of course, are in the realm of pure democracy. Pure democracy is something we were supposed to avoid. We were supposed to be a republic ruled by the Constitution. And one of the critical functions in a republic of the public is to enforce the Constitution. We have to have an electorate that is informed and properly motivated, that understands the principles upon which our government was founded and understands the truth, and uses that truth to enforce the Constitution, to limit what government does, and to restrain it to its properly ordained functions. Let's talk a little bit about those high poll ratings, shall we not? Thad Bale is a political scientist at the University of North Carolina. He was asked by USA Today to explain Mr. Clinton's apparently impervious popularity. What it comes down to is that the economy is good, most people have jobs, and most people believe he's doing a reasonably good job, said Mr. Bale. He went on to elaborate by saying that while the public was properly mortified about Mr. Clinton's adolescent behavior, he said the following, quote, "It's not as if he sold the Defense Department to the Chinese." Well, no, he didn't sell them the Defense Department. He sold them the presidency and threw in the Defense Department as a bonus. And if the public had known that and understood this, impeachment would have turned out a lot differently. Furthermore, if he had been impeached for Chinagate, Al Gore probably would have had to leave office before him. Because Al Gore, as I said a minute or two ago, was the bag man for a lot of the illegal campaign contributions. He seems to be reasonably respectable in terms of his personal behavior. But in terms of Chinagate, he is more directly and personally implicated than Bill Clinton was. So Mr. Clinton was impeached for the wrong reasons. Yes, it was good he was impeached for committing offenses that are criminal in nature, that undermine the soundness of our legal system. He now stands to be disbarred, which, and here's a dismal reflection, with all due respect to the attorneys in the audience, if Mr. Clinton is disbarred, that means he is inadequately ethical to be an attorney, but he is still suitable to be a president.